All right, so welcome to the deep dive. You know how it is, stacks of research, hours of reading, but we're here to pull out the good stuff. And today we're diving into the Adventures of Tom Sawyer.
Yeah, Tom Sawyer.
Not just like the basic plot points, the stuff everyone remembers from childhood. We're talking about the literary stuff, the things that'll make you sound like a genius in your lit class.
Right. For the lit students out there.
Exactly.
Ready?
Let's do it.
Let's go.
So one thing I've found really interesting, this book, it's a classic, right?
Oh, absolutely.
But it actually wasn't an overnight success.
Really?
Yeah, I know. It eventually became Mark Twain's best-selling book, during his lifetime at least. But it took a while. It wasn't like an instant hit or anything.
That's wild. I mean, you think a story about a mischievous boy getting into trouble. That's a recipe for success, right?
You'd think, right?
Maybe it's because Tom Sawyer just works on so many levels. Oh, for sure. I mean, yeah, you've got the humor, the adventure, it pulls you in, but there's also this deeper layer, like the satire and the social commentary, which, when you think about it, that's like a huge part of Mark Twain's legacy.
Yeah, good point. And speaking of social commentary, there's that elephant in the room. The book uses some language. Well, some of it was considered really offensive today.
Right.
Especially when it comes to race. And, we're not going to shy away from that.
It's there.
It's definitely part of the conversation.
But today, for today's deep dive, we're really focusing on the craft of the book.
The writing itself.
Exactly.
And one of the things that makes it so vivid is the setting, St. Petersburg.
Right, St. Petersburg.
Well, it's actually based on Mark Twain's real hometown, Hannibal, Missouri.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And many of the places Tom gets into trouble, they're real places. You can actually visit them today.
No way. So it's like this fictional world, but built on this real foundation. That's so cool.
There's a whole other dimension. It totally does.
Yeah.
And then you've got that, overarching theme of boyhood.
Oh, yeah.
The whole runaway adventure with Joe and Huckleberry Finn.
Right.
It's like the perfect illustration of that feeling, that yearning for freedom, the thrill of getting away with something. It's just so classic.
Definitely.
I don't know. Do you remember that scene where Clom and Joe are trying to learn to smoke a pipe?
Oh, yeah.
How much they want to oppress the other boys. It's hilarious, but also kind of awkward.
It's such a perfect blend of mischief and, innocence, which I think is what Twain captures so well.
Yeah, for sure. It's just like this timeless snapshot of boyhood, right? Even if some of the specifics are different today.
Definitely timeless.
I was surprised to learn that Tom Sawyer was actually Twain's first novel.
Is that right?
Yeah, his first attempt at a novel. He'd written other stuff before, but this was his debut in the novel format.
Interesting. Yeah, he'd done some travel writing and humorous sketches, even parodies of children's literature, if you can believe it. And it's really interesting to see how that background, how it all plays into Tom Sawyer, that sense of humor, the sharp observations about society. He was already honing those skills.
Right. It's like he was playing around with those classic archetypes in his earlier work, like the good boy, the bad boy. And then with Tom Sawyer, it all comes together. He blends them.
That's a great point.
Because Tom isn't just this prankster.
Oh, no.
He's got these moments of real generosity, genuine kindness.
Yeah.
Which makes him, it makes him so much more interesting as a character.
It makes him relatable.
Exactly, even today. That complexity.
Absolutely. Tom embodies those contradictions. The contradictions of childhood, I guess you could say. He's impulsive, but also empathetic. He can be selfish, but then also selfless. And all at the same time.
And that's what makes him believable?
Exactly. He's not a perfect hero, but he's a product of his time and his place, but also, this representation of what it means to be a boy, this timeless representation.
I like that. Timeless. And speaking of time, Tom Sawyer didn't just end with one book.
Oh, that's right.
There are actually 3 sequels: Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, Tom Sawyer Abroad, and Tom Sawyer Detective.
3 sequels. Wow.
And here's where things get really interesting, because there's a big shift in those sequels. Tom Sawyer, the first one, it's told from a third-person perspective.
Right, third person.
But then the sequels switch to Huck Finn's perspective.
Right.
First person.
Oh, wow. Big change.
Huge change.
I wonder how that narrative shift, how does that change how you experience the story?
Right. Because you're seeing everything through Huck's eyes.
Exactly. Does it change how we see Tom?
It's like seeing him through a different lens. And get this, there were actually 2 more Tom Sawyer sequels: Huck and Tom Among the Indians, and Tom Sawyer's Conspiracy.
But they were never finished.
Really?
Yeah, unfinished. But I think, even unfinished, they show us how much this character, how much Tom Sawyer, resonated with Mark Twain and with readers.
It's like Twain just couldn't let go. I know. He kept coming back to this world, to Tom Sawyer, even if the stories weren't, like, fully formed.
It speaks to his appeal, to that spark of boyhood. It just keeps fascinating us.
Totally. And on that note, let's take a quick break. And when we come back, we'll dive into some of the literary techniques Twain uses to bring Tom Sawyer to life.
And you know what else makes Tom Sawyer so interesting for lit students?
What's that?
It's how Twain uses language.
Oh, yeah, the language.
He creates a whole world with it.
Absolutely. Like, it's not just what the characters are saying, it's how they say it.
Right.
All that dialect, vernacular speech, it makes it feel so real.
Like you're right there with them.
Exactly. Eavesdropping on their conversations.
And Twain was just like a master at capturing that. The rhythms, the nuances, how people really spoke
Back then.
in that time,
Yeah.
in that place, the slang, the idioms, the whole way he uses language to create this picture of life in the American South is just amazing.
And it's not just about realism either.
No, not just realism.
He also uses language for humor and satire.
Oh, absolutely.
Like, remember that scene where Tom tricks his friends into whitewashing the fence?
Yeah, classic.
It's brilliant.
Pure genius.
He uses reverse psychology.
Makes a chore sound like a privilege.
I know. And it's hilarious.
It's also like super insightful.
About human nature.
Yeah. How easily we can be persuaded.
Totally. It's like he's holding up this mirror
To society.
to all of us,
Yeah.
showing us our weaknesses.
Our foibles.
But he does it with a wink and a smile.
Always with that humor.
And then, on the other hand, I mean, there's also this thread of death and superstition that runs through the book.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
It adds this whole other layer.
A darker layer.
The graveyard scene, all the superstitions surrounding Injun Joe,
Right.
the fear that grips the town,
Yeah, it creates this undercurrent, this darkness.
and suspense
Mhm.
that contrasts so sharply with all the lighthearted adventures.
That juxtaposition is fascinating.
It really is. On the one hand, you have these childhood escapades,
Right.
but then there's this real sense of danger lurking beneath the surface.
It's like the duality of childhood itself, isn't it?
Maybe. Like that innocence, that vulnerability,
The wonder and the fear.
all mixed up together.
All part of it.
And speaking of fear, you can't talk about Tom Sawyer without talking about Injun Joe,
Oh, no, he's a huge part of it.
one of the most memorable villains.
In all of American literature, really.
Right. He's this menacing figure, this other.
He embodies a lot of the prejudices of the time.
Absolutely. He's complex, though,
Oh, for sure.
and definitely a product of the injustices he's faced.
Definitely.
But even so, Twain doesn't shy away from showing his humanity, even when he's at his worst.
Yeah, it's not black and white.
Nope. And even though he's the villain, there's this element of tragedy to him.
It makes you think.
It does. It's like Twain is saying, hey, even the bad guys have a story.
That's what makes his work so powerful.
Yeah.
So thought-provoking.
He doesn't give us easy answers.
Simple judgments.
He wants us to look deeper, beyond the surface, and grapple with, like, the messy reality of human nature.
Absolutely. And then there's that ending.
Oh my gosh, the ending.
Tom and Becky, trapped in the cave.
Talk about suspense.
Twain really knows how to ratchet up the tension.
The darkness closing in, that feeling of claustrophobia, the panic. It's intense.
It's almost too much.
And then,
yeah,
that relief when they finally escape. Phew.
it gets you every time.
It's like this reminder, even in the darkest times, there's always hope.
And of course, they find the treasure.
Buried treasure.
Yeah.
Like a reward for all their bravery.
Classic happy ending.
But it's more than that, too.
It's symbolic.
It represents their journey.
They faced their fears. They overcame all these obstacles. They came out of the darkness,
Sure.
transformed.
And they learned some valuable lessons along the way. About friendship, about loyalty, about courage.
Important lessons.
But here's what I find interesting. They're wealthy now,
Yeah, they found the treasure.
but they still dream of more adventures.
They're not satisfied.
Which says a lot about the themes of freedom and societal expectations.
Right. Like, they have financial security now, but they still yearn for something more. Something beyond their little town.
That yearning for something more, that restlessness.
It's so universal, so human.
It makes you think about how much of Tom Sawyer is really about those universal experiences of childhood and coming of age.
It's like Twain tapped into something timeless. That feeling of wanting to break free, to explore, to experience life on your own terms.
And those feelings,
Yeah.
they resonate just as strongly today.
Absolutely.
The Adventures of Tom Sawyer. It's more than just a fun read. It's a story that keeps speaking to us across generations.
A story that still has so much to say.
Okay, so we're back. Back for the final part of our deep dive into the Adventures of Tom Sawyer. And now I guess the big question, like how do we read this book today? I mean, through a modern lens, right? Because it was written over 150 years ago. Things have changed a bit.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, that's the challenge and the beauty, really,
Yeah.
of engaging with classic literature. We can't just, impose our values, like our 21st century values, on a 19th century text.
Right. Yep.
But it's also, super fascinating to see how these stories, how they hold up, or, maybe how they don't, against our current understanding of the world.
So where do we even begin? I mean, there's the language,
Oh, yeah. The language is a big one.
like some of the terms,
Yeah.
the way certain characters are described, especially Injun Joe.
It's just not okay today.
Not at all.
We can't ignore that. And we shouldn't. I mean, it's important to acknowledge the historical context,
Yeah.
the racism, the prejudices
Yeah.
that were unfortunately just commonplace back then, in Twain's time.
Yeah. It's about recognizing those flaws,
Yeah.
but also appreciating, what the book offers.
The artistry.
The artistry, the social commentary.
Because even though some of the language is outdated, the themes, like the themes of prejudice, of social
Are
injustice.
still relevant.
Oh, absolutely. They're more relevant than ever. I mean, Twain was such a sharp observer of human nature.
He was.
And his work, it often holds up this mirror to society, to the hypocrisy, the inequality.
And even though the specifics might have changed, those underlying dynamics, the
Yeah.
power, the prejudice, the social exclusion, it's all still there.
In different forms, yeah. But it's there.
It makes you wonder what Twain would say about our world today. I mean, he was such a master satirist,
He was.
always poking fun at all the absurdity
Yeah.
of human behavior.
I think he'd have a field day with our current, social and political climate. The technology,
Yeah.
the media, the way we interact.
Oh, totally. Imagine him taking on social media.
The 24-hour news cycle.
I can see it now, skewering our selfie culture, our addiction to smartphones.
Oh, for sure. But I also think, beneath the humor, he'd be deeply concerned about the same things he wrote about.
Yeah, those core issues. Inequality, injustice, the abuse of power.
Those themes are timeless. And that's what makes Tom Sawyer so enduring. It's not just a product of its time. It's a story that transcends time.
And keeps speaking to us.
Yeah.
Cross generations. Makes us examine these issues in our own context.
Yeah.
And maybe that's why we keep retelling his story.
Adapting it.
For movies,
Yeah.
TV.
Even musicals.
It's that rebellious spirit.
That thirst for adventure.
We're still drawn to it, even if we recognize, the complexities of his world.
And I think, it's not just about escapism.
No, not just escapism.
There's a nostalgia there, too, for a simpler time, for a childhood where kids could just roam free, explore, without constant, adult supervision.
But of course, we can't romanticize the past too much.
Oh, absolutely not. There were real hardships, real dangers back then.
Yeah, we don't want to go back to that.
No. But it's about finding that balance, appreciating the adventure, the freedom that Tom represents, but also acknowledging the historical context, the ways our values have changed. Exactly. Reading with a critical eye, recognizing both the flaws and the power of the book. I mean, that's what makes engaging with these classics so rewarding.
It does. Challenges us to think critically, question our assumptions, see the world through different lenses. So what's the takeaway then for our listeners, for those picking up Tom Sawyer for the first time, or maybe rereading it with fresh eyes?
I think the key is, to be active,
Yeah.
to be critical. Don't shy away from the uncomfortable parts. The language might feel jarring to modern ears, but also don't let those parts overshadow everything else. The artistry, the humor, the insights into human nature.
It's about seeing Tom Sawyer as both a product of its time, but also something that transcends time. A story about childhood, about growing up in a world that's not always fair or just.
And in the end, I think it leaves us with more questions than answers.
Which I guess is what makes it such a rich read, even today.
I think so.
And that, my friends, wraps up our deep dive into the adventures of Tom Sawyer. We hope you've enjoyed it. And until next time, happy reading.